guys, welcome back to another video. Today's video is another book versus media. TV show, movie, whatever it may be. Today I'm going to be going over Blood Ties. Blood Ties is a series of books that came out in the 1990s, and they based a TV show off of it in 2007 to 2008. It got 22 episodes, 2 seasons. Not the greatest adaptation of a book to show I've ever seen, but it had its moments. It was a little campy. It came out the same year as Moonlight, which only made it 16 episodes, which was a very similar theme. A vampire helping solve crimes, you could say. They're different, but they got the same themes. Now, I don't know if Moonlight is based off of any sets of books. I have not read them if it is, but I did read the Blood series, I think it's called. There are 5 main books in the series, and then there are a bunch of short stories that were published after the main series, and then there's an offshoot series. But the main book series is 5 books that they took and made into a 22 episode show. So today I'm going to be talking about the differences and the similarities between the show and the books.
You please.
I'd hate to waste it.
The first major change is the characters. Now, a lot of the characters look exactly the same or very close. Vicky is described as blonde. You know, her eyesight's going, so she wears these glasses, like, pushed up to her face. They're thick lenses. You know, stubborn and always thinks she's right and carries herself and throws herself into danger. The show does a very good job at describing Vicky, and the book counterpart is basically the same person. Mike is also a very similar character. They're described basically the same. The actors they chose for the show fit the characters really well. The major change, and the only one that really is noticeable, is Henry. Henry in the TV show is played by the Canadian actor Kyle Schmid. He is 5'10", he has brown curly hair that goes to his shoulders, he has beautiful blue eyes, cleft chin, holds himself, he's just confident. In the books, he is much shorter. I believe he is 5'6". I don't remember if they actually say how tall he is, but he's taller than, he's shorter than Vicky in the books. He's described as short. So I ranged him about 5'5", 5'6". He could be shorter. And he also has strawberry blonde hair that I believe is styled similarly to Kyle's hair in the show, but it's strawberry blonde. And he has freckles, I think, or something similar. So he's ginger, basically, and short. Basically the same personality, just change the hair color. His eyes are light hazel rather than blue, and he's just like 4 or more inches shorter. He's probably my height. I'm 5'4", so he's probably around my height, maybe a few inches taller, maybe a few inches shorter. But he is described as short. He is based off the real-life person Henry Fitzgerald, Duke of Somerset. He was a son of Henry VIII. He died at 17, so in these books, Henry dies or becomes a vampire at 17 and then goes to live his vampire life. That is the same in the book and in the show. He has the same backstory. He just looks a little different. Now, as I said earlier, there are 5 books in the main series. They are Blood Price, Blood Trail, Bloodlines, Blood Pact, and Blood Debt. Now, a few of the episodes from the show, which there are 22, obviously they're not all based off the books since there are only 5 by the time that this show came out. Short stories have been published after the series, but not during or before, as far as I know. The first 2 episodes of the series, which I believe came out as a double premiere the first time it came on TV, is called Blood Price, which is based off the first book. It basically takes the first book and puts it on TV. There are a few slight changes, but not enough to make it dramatic. Basically, everything that happens in those first 2 episodes happens in the book. Norman, makes a deal with a demon so he can be popular, not be laughed at all the time. People are dying in a pentagram shape. It ends with Corinne being kidnapped, and then, Vicky being kidnapped and almost sacrificed to said demon, and then Henry and Mike save the day, and it's a whole thing. You can watch the show, but the book they're basically the same. The second book, Blood Trail, has werewolves where a family is being hunted and they can't really tell anyone because, well, the werewolves can't really be telling the townspeople that. So Henry is friends with the family and has Vicky help them out. Eventually you find out it's this religious old man who's like, "Oh my god, you're monsters." And a whole fight ensues. There is not an episode in the show that is directly based off of this book, but there is a season 2 episode called Wild Blood, which does involve werewolves and them being taken out. The third book is called Bloodlines and involves a mummy. Basically, they find a sarcophagus in the desert. They go, "Let's open it." So they take it back to Toronto, or the Canadian area where the books and the show take place, and open it up, and the mummy's not dead. He's actually been cursed. And he comes to life and basically drains the life out of people, and is causing Henry to have nightmares about seeing the sun. Now, Henry believes that this is because he's been alive too long. He's known a few vampires that once they get too old, they just walk into the sun. They just can't take it anymore. But he doesn't feel like he wants to die. Like, he's like, I don't understand why these are happening. I don't want to die, but maybe deep down, I do. And it's scaring him, and it's scaring Vicky. And it's like, the mummy eventually is defeated after this ginormous battle where he tries to take over the entire town and turn them into his slaves. It's a whole thing. But there is an episode in season 2, and it's episode 7, called Wrapped, which is a very similar aspect where Henry is seeing the sun and a mummy comes to town and eventually comes back to life. I believe he's played by Machete, which is just an awesome person to play that mummy. I don't think it's as big scale as the book describes it, because literally this mummy is taking over the police and trying to make, like, the town his, have them worship him and his deity who wants, followers. But it is based off of that book. The fourth book is called Blood Pact. This is where Vicky's mother dies, and she goes to the wake and realizes her mother's body is gone. And then a bunch of stuff ensues where she figures out that her mom was turned into a zombie by a bunch of freaks from a college who are trying to bring back dead people by implanting, like, this bacteria and basically making living zombies, but they can kind of think. Henry gets involved and accidentally gets trapped in a cold box and then almost starves to death. He attacks Vicky and Mike when they try to rescue him. It ends with a fire breaking out, Vicky almost fucking dying because she gets beat in the face, and then Henry has to turn her into a vampire. That is how that book ends. Henry has to turn her to save her life, otherwise she is going to die. Now, of course, anyone who's watched the show knows that Vicky never becomes a vampire, which is the main thing that they cut out. There's also not an episode that is based directly on this book. There is an episode in season 1 called Necrodome, where this mortician is bringing back people to fight in like zombie against zombie. So it's completely different storyline, but it does involve bringing back dead people who kind of have a mind of their own, but not really. So they took themes of it, just not the main story. The last book is known as Blood Debt. This one, Vicky is a vampire, and Henry is seeing a ghost every time he wakes up, and when the ghost screams, someone in his building dies. So he calls Vicky up and being like, hey, come on over, I need this situation fixed. However, there is a thing with vampires in this series where they cannot be within the same hunting ground or they'll want to kill each other. They're lone creatures, so they can love humans and be close to humans, obviously, because they eat them. But once, the first year of a maker and their progeny, they can be together for a year, where they can teach them and show them how to feed and control themselves and whatever it may be. But after that year, they'll grow to hate each other and they have to separate. So in this book, she comes back and she's like, that's not real, that's not how it works. It is. They almost murder each other multiple times, and then they kill a bunch of people and have sex right after, that's a whole thing. That's a whole thing. And by the end, they're not happy about sharing the area, but they realize that they could, if they had to, they could share a region. Or at least every once in a while, they could still see each other. They could still say hello, but they wouldn't want to hang out with each other all the time. That book is not involved in any of the episodes at all. It involves, doctors stealing organs, and that's why this ghost is appearing, because they died unlawfully. I don't believe anything like that happens in the show. Because Vicky doesn't become a vampire. So, I mean, they could base themes off of this book, but they would not be able to use the book because they never got to that storyline. Now, to characters. There are a few characters within the TV show that have bigger parts than they do in the books. The two main ones are Norman and Corinne. Norman and Corinne are only mentioned in the first book of the series, which is what the first 2 episodes of the show are based off of. They are not involved in any of the other books at all. They might be mentioned, but they are not a part of the story. In the TV show, however, Norman, kicks the bucket as he does in the book, but then he comes back, I think once, maybe even twice. He doesn't stay dead. He comes back all possessed and shit. That doesn't happen. He just goes to hell and never returns. Corinne is saved at the very end, and she goes on with her life. She does not become the assistant to Vicky as she does in the TV show. She is not involved in every case. She does not do research for Vicky. She does not become a secretary for Vicky. She is not mentioned again. She just disappears. The TV show made those 2 characters bigger than they actually were. And Christina, who appears in the show, I believe halfway through season 1 or into season 2, she actually shows up in town, breaking the rule that you're not supposed to be in another vampire's hunting ground. You get fidgety. She comes to visit Henry. In the books, she is mentioned in flashbacks and in stories that Henry tells, but she does not show up. She never returns to Henry. The books, she basically abandons him and then never comes back. She's like, bye, bitch, and she's gone. After that first year, she just leaves. So she does not return. So throughout the series of books and the show, there are little things that they switched that, aren't that big a deal, but they are noticeable. Henry, in the books, is a romance writer. He writes romance novels. In the TV show, however, he is a comic book writer. So it's not that much of a dramatic difference. He's still a writer, but it is more like artistic in drawing rather than writing. Another ginormous change is that Vicky never becomes a vampire. The show ended dramatically in season 2, and an ending that I fucking hate. Corinne, gets possessed by a demon, and, her heart gets, not in her body, and it's, a whole thing, and then Vicky has to decide if she wants to go with Henry or if she wants to go with Mike, and it's dude. It was not a good ending to the show. I don't know if they were planning to connect that to a season 3, or if it got canceled before then. I don't know. All I know is that it wasn't good. Only a few of the episodes of the show are based off the books. Other ones, they made. And they are interesting storylines, but they're not a part of the books. And I think it would have been great to see Vicky become a vampire, because in the books, it's a really interesting story. Henry turns Vicky to save her life. And the first year they spend together, Vicky actually goes on a rampage and starts murdering bad people, which is really awesome. And in the last book, they get along, but they're both vampires. So she does go on a little bit of a murder spree, just a little. And she does go to Mike, because after that first year, she can't be with Henry. And so she goes to Mike, and Mike is now with a vampire. And she feeds on Mike sometimes, and they have a good relationship, but they're not the same anymore. And he notices a few things, that she's a little more cruel, a little more apt to violence than she used to be. And I think it would have been really cool to see that storyline in the show. However, it did get canceled, and we never got to see a season 3. Maybe in season 3 that would have happened. Personally, I think that should have been a end of season 2 thing, where the last episode or 2 would be that storyline where she gets turned into a vampire. And then, if they got a season 3, they could have had it where they experience her vampireness, being a detective, and all this other jazz. But we never got to that. It got canceled. The show's writers were not the best, in my opinion. A few of the episodes, based off the books and not based off the books, were pretty good. The acting was a little iffy sometimes. That could be blamed on writing or the actor itself. Now, the actors have gone off to do really good shows after this, and other amazing projects. So I believe part of it was the writing and the way they worded things, but this came out in 2007. This was the language of the time. You can blame it on that, especially when it comes to effects and everything else in between. This came out the same year as Moonlight, which has a very similar problem with the writing and just the vibe of the show. They have very similar aspects to them. Now, a show that came out in the 90s, which I love and I have talked about before, is Forever Night, which is the first or one of the first, to go with a vampire detective. In that show, he is actually a detective that works with the police who solves crimes. In Moonlight, Mick helps Beth solve crimes, but he's not he's not with it. He's a PI. And in Blood Ties, Henry is more like just her backup. Vicky is a PI herself, and then when she needs assistance, Henry is there, whether it be knowledge or physical force or seeing at night, he is there for her. So it goes from detective to PI helper, I guess you could say. So all three shows are very similar. Forever Night got 3 whole seasons, Moonlight got 16 episodes, and Blood Ties got 2 seasons, over 22 episodes. They're all different, but they're all the aspect of a vampire detective, which I actually really like this type of trope where a vampire absolves his sins by solving crime. I think it's really cool, whether it be a detective, a cop, a PI, an assistant, whatever it may be. I think it's just really cool, and I would love to see more content within this genre in the future. There's probably more shows or movies based off of this idea that I have not mentioned that could be really good that I just haven't seen. And if you know of them, comment down below. I'll watch them. Blood Ties has its issues. It's based off a really good series of books. I own all 5 books, and they are awesome, so I would highly suggest reading them. There are many short stories and offshoots of this series that I have not read myself, but I've heard are very good as well. So if you watched the show and you loved it, but it could have there could have been more. You know, you wish there was just more. Read the books and the short stories. Now, I read the books after I watched the show, and I loved the show, but I love campy things. You know what I mean? Where it's like kind of cringy, but you like it. I watched My Babysitter's a Vampire, so that's my cup of tea. I love that sort of thing. So I enjoyed it. I know a lot of people probably didn't, why it got canceled most likely, but I thought it was hella nice. There are probably more differences and similarities that I did not mention. I mean, Mike and Vicky are basically the same. Henry's got some visual differences and things he does. Some of the cases involved within the books are not in the show, and there's a bunch of episodes in the show that don't have a book attached to them, but they are really interesting. It's like Supernatural. It's episode monsters. It reminds me of that, but more, there's a detective and a vampire solving the case rather than the Winchesters. But it's a very similar vibe to like the early seasons of Supernatural, where that's what they were doing. They were just hunting monsters, episode monsters. Alright guys, I really hope you enjoyed this video. There wasn't a lot to go off of, as this show it happened a while ago. It's not as big as, let's say, Interview with the Vampire or The Vampire Academy. It was a lot harder to actually find this information. If I had never read the books, I don't think I would be able to do a video like this, because when I looked up book versus TV show, there were no articles. There was nothing to give me any basis off of, so I had to look through every single one of these books to find the information, which took me a little longer than I would have liked, but it made it a more entertaining thing to like find the information, find the differences. And luckily, I had watched the show prior to reading these books, so I kind of knew. So when I was reading the books, I was like, oh, that happened in the show. Or, oh, I wish that happened in the show, which happened a lot throughout the books, where I was like, that should have happened, but it didn't. So that happens a lot. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope to do more of this series. But me personally, I'm not a ginormous book reader, which is shelf of books deters from that fact, but I don't read often. Sometimes I get in these spells where I just read a lot, or I find the time to read, but personally, I'm a visual person. I like to watch TV shows and movies rather than read books. So I do read, obviously, but it's not my favorite piece of media, you could say. So there isn't a lot of, like, when it comes to series who've been turned into shows, it depends. Sometimes I've read them, sometimes I haven't. But maybe there'll be more to this series in the future. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll be back again on Thursday with another True Crime Thursday, and Monday with whatever I decided to post. Alright guys, I'll see you later. Whoosh.